right, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm seeing a lot of people, joining the meeting. I'm glad that we are getting the numbers for this all-important conversation. Welcome to this session of the IREN Growthpad Virtual Food Festival 2020. A lot of exciting conversations on how we can enrich not just our culture, but be able to sell it out in ways of tourism. And for this particular session, we'll be speaking to Didi Wamukoya. She's a lawyer, an author, a senior manager at the Wildlife Law Enforcement Africa, at the Africa Wildlife Foundation. Didi, it's a pleasure to have you joining us here, and we can't wait for your insights on this. The topic at this particular hour will be: what type of policy innovation should the Kenya tourism and the food sector look forward to post-COVID-19? We are all alive to the realization and the effects of COVID since March, and it's a global problem. Among the sectors that have been greatly affected internationally is tourism. In fact, statistics put it at about 60 to 80% decline in the international tourism sector. So then as a country, what are some of the policies we need to put in place as we're talking about a post-COVID-19 recovery measure? So Didi will also be helping us, just talk about that and see where we are as a country. What will be the place of indigenous food? What are some of the different tourism experiences we need to start exploring and putting policies around? But Didi, before we get into all that, I'd like to welcome you once again. Thank you for being with us here in the IREN Growthpad Virtual Food Festival 2020. I know you have a presentation, and I'd like us to just go straight into that for it to set the stage and inform the conversation that we'll be having with myself and you and everyone else who's joining us in for the next 1 hour. Didi, I think I'll throw it to you now to just take us over. Give us first your opening remarks and take us through this presentation on the type of policy innovations that the Kenya tourism and food sector should look forward to in our post-COVID-19 recovery measure. Didi.
Thank you, Akisa. I'll just go ahead and share my screen so that you can see my presentation. Yeah, so thank you again for inviting me to speak on this topic. In my area of work in the wildlife law enforcement sector, one of the things we experienced on the onset of COVID was that we had the rangers and community scouts whom we support who actually don't have their salaries coming in. And this is because mostly they rely on tourism to get income, especially the community conservancies. And so tourism has impacted many livelihoods. COVID-19 has impacted many livelihoods which depend on tourism. So I'll just go through my presentation. So as Akisa has mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered an unprecedented crisis in the tourism and food service industries. We are seeing loss of jobs. We are seeing closing of businesses. There are ancillary businesses related to tourism which are also suffering. They provide jobs and people have lost their jobs because of this. And it has been estimated that at the beginning of this year, there was a 60% decline, just after COVID was declared in March, a 60% decline in international tourism, and that this could go as low as an 80% decline by December 2020 if we don't start seeing recovery now. So you can see how dire the situation is. And so government policy is one of the ways that we can use for quick recovery to recover faster when it comes to the tourism sector. And what is government policy? It is the process by which government translates its vision into actions by guiding decision that will drive change and deliver results for the good of its citizens. Because of the important linkages between tourism and the food service sectors to other sectors, including agriculture, transport, education, conservation, sports, and technology, whatever policies the government needs to put in place for recovery of the tourism sector need to be cross-cutting and holistic. They need to be integrated to make sure that all these other sectors, the issues which have been affecting them due to COVID, are also addressed. So what are the types of policies that can insulate the tourism and food service industries? Firstly, we have what are known as distributive policies. And these are government policies that will direct government spending towards recovery of the tourism and food service sectors. So what basically this means is that government deliberately takes some money and injects it into the tourism sector for recovery. And then we have the redistributive policies. And these are the policies that reduce inequality by promoting economic, social, and environmental equity. And the government can use such policies to redistribute resources from sectors that have not been greatly impacted by COVID-19 towards the recovery of the tourism and food service sectors. So this just means that the government may deliberately take money that was meant for other sectors, but these sectors have not really been impacted by COVID, and redistribute this money towards the tourism and food service sectors for recovery. And then we have regulatory policies. And these are policies that are formulated to impose controls and restrictions on certain activities in order to compel behavior change. So such policies may need to be adapted to ensure the safety of visitors, of our hospitality staff, food service staff, and the public generally in the tourism and food service sectors post-COVID-19. So we have to make sure that we are safe, because we have been told it may be some years before this COVID-19 pandemic is completely over. And before we get the vaccine, we still need to remain safe. And therefore the government may need to put in place regulations. Already we have them in place, like put on your mask, maintain social distancing, and so on. And they need to enforce this kind of regulatory policies. So what is it that we would like to see in an innovative policy that will help in the recovery of the tourism and food industry sectors? First, so the policy must be relevant to the recovery and growth and expansion of the tourism and food service sectors post-COVID-19. I'm emphasizing expansion because this pandemic has shown us that we now need to think broader. We don't need only to rely on what have been the traditional tourism experiences in Kenya. We need to expand the sector and go into other ways, such as, for example, virtual tourism, whereby we'll still be able to earn an income even during any future pandemics that may come into place. And then the policy needs to be realistic, and it should address the real changes being faced by the sectors, and it must offer practical solutions. So we want to see a realistic policy with practical solutions. We don't want to see academic solutions. We don't want to see solutions copied from other countries or other sectors that are not implementable in the Kenya tourism and food industry sector. We want policies that are attainable. So it must have an implementable mechanism, and it must offer other mechanisms for implementation that are addressing sources of funds, for example, and ensuring proper implementation. So in order for the policy to be attainable, it must address the sources of funds. Where is the funding coming from to implement this innovative policy changes that we want to see? The policy must be flexible. It should be able to foresee and easily adapt to new and emerging trends of COVID-19. And it should also be able to address any future pandemics or any other, should I say, human or disease disasters that are similar to the COVID-19 pandemic. The policy should be enforceable, and it must clearly stipulate the persons, institutions responsible for its enforcement and the consequences of violating the policy. It should be inclusive, meaning that all stakeholders should be engaged and involved in coming up with the solutions for this problem. And the scope of the policy should also address the cross-cutting sectors, which I mentioned earlier, agriculture, and so on. Then the policy should also be streamlined to other government policies, because inconsistency will result in confusion and it will lead to delays in action. So policy innovations in the tourism and food service industries post-COVID that we may want to see. What are the sort of policy innovations? I just have a few suggestions and some of them may come from you. So one of the policy innovations we want to see is policies re-engineering business models to adapt to the COVID situation. So these policies will require the remodeling of tourist and food service business with the goal of improving product output, quality, or reducing costs, and encouraging quick recovery from the COVID crisis, as well as being resilient in the face of future pandemics. So tourists, as we know and we've read, tourists are now, and even us as domestic tourists, we're after high quality experiences, and the industry needs to develop additional dimensions to the products on offer in order to attract and retain both international and domestic tourists. These additional dimensions need to ensure adaptation to the new normal. That is the new normal we are living now during the COVID-19 pandemic and also post-COVID. And this includes measures to ensure social distancing, for example, high levels of cleanliness and sanitization to avoid spread of disease-causing pathogens. So as the industry streamlines COVID prevention measures in its day-to-day operations, it also needs to ensure that measures adopted do not negatively impact the authenticity of the visitor's experience. So here we have a sort of catch-22 situation. I want to experience, I want a certain tourism experience, like for example, food, but I need to be in a mask. So whatever measures are put in place should make sure that it does not impact the authenticity of my experience. Sorry. So we also want to see policies that enhance domestic tourism. I think one of the lessons that COVID-19 has taught us is that we need to cultivate domestic tourism. We need to encourage Kenyans to travel around Kenya, to visit different sites, and get different experiences from just going to Ushago or to their village as we normally do for our holidays. So domestic tourism is actually expected to recover more quickly than international tourism post-COVID. And unfortunately, Kenya has in the past relied on international tourism, and therefore we need to cultivate domestic tourism for sustainability of the sector. We need to plug into Kenyans, what Kenyans want to experience, where Kenyans want to go, and the tourism sector needs to leverage on this. So it is important for the government to put in place policies that will spur the growth of domestic tourism, and this should ultimately be cultivated as the backbone of the tourism and food service industries in Kenya. So we are saying let our backbone not be international tourism, let it be domestic tourism in Kenya. And then we want to see policies encouraging niche tourism. There's a growing trend in the tourism and food service sectors, and this is the search for unique personalized experiences by visitors in alternative destinations. The focus of many tourists has actually changed from physical sites to experiences. So instead of just wanting to go and see an elephant, I want to experience nature. I want to experience being in the wild, being in a quiet place. So tourists, both domestic and international, are now looking to consume intangible expressions of culture, such as the atmosphere, the creativity, and the lifestyle of certain people and certain community. In Kenya's 2030 tourism blueprint, it has listed some core tourism experiences. These are beach and marine, African safari, wildlife, nature, scenic tourism, culture and heritage, city and business tourism. And it has also listed secondary experiences such as adventure, sports, and desert. So I'm just going to talk about a few which I've listed here, just to give you an outlook of where we need to grow, where we need to emphasize. So one of them is culinary tourism, and food is one of the main elements that is currently stimulating niche tourism in the world. Food provides new opportunities for tourism destinations, and government policy should be geared towards experiencing developing and marketing and branding culinary tourism. Further, the relationship between tourism and food experiences can play an important role actually in local development because it links culture and tourism. Food is one of the main gateways to a people's culture and can bring tourists and locals together in a shared cultural experience. Food can also be linked to local customs, traditions, landscapes, and actually even systems of food, traditional systems of food production. And this can provide engaging, authentic experiences for tourists. Branding and image. So culinary tourism can actually bring branding and image to a particular community or even to a country. So for example, we know France for its wine. We know, for example, we know the Mediterranean diet, which originated in Greece. So foods can be distinctive elements of the brand image of destinations and can help to create distinctiveness in a crowded marketplace. So everyone is providing, say, beach tourism. But if your beach tourism is also offering the local coastal food, for example, that is only found in the Kenyan coast, then you are able to provide a unique experience in the overcrowded beach tourism sector. And then culinary tourism also develops local skills and infrastructure. And food tourism can stimulate the development of skills and infrastructure for food production and consumption. Communities can develop food museums, for example, food routes and trails, and food stories. I don't know if there's any food museum in Kenya, maybe you can tell me. But if you go to countries like France, there are wine museums. Why don't we have a local brew museum in Kenya so that if I want to experience all the local alcoholic beverages in this country and learn how they are made, I just go to that local brews museum and I can taste Muratina, Busa, and other Mnazi, and other local drinks from all our cultures. Then there is what is known as philanthropic tourism, which I don't think Kenya is really leveraging on. We leave this to NGOs, and NGOs mostly don't bring the people here as philanthropic tourists, but as donors for various projects. So philanthropic tourism involves travelers donating their time, their money, their skills, and their expertise to the place where they are visiting. Philanthropic tourism can facilitate mutually beneficial experiences between the local community and actually the tourists who are coming to visit. So the tourists, for example, can be interested in building a school. They can be interested in providing materials for constructing, say, water infrastructure in a particular village or community where they are visiting. So that is what is philanthropic tourism, and it's something that we need to encourage. And then we have adventure tourism, which has been mentioned in the Kenyan 2030 blueprint, but as a secondary experience as opposed to one of the core tourism experiences. So adventure tourism is where the traveler seeks adventure or exploration in their travel. Basically, it is thrill seeking in your travel. So you'll see things such as mountain climbing, hill climbing, skydiving, scuba diving, extreme driving, extreme motoring and such like activities. So adventure tourism gains much of its excitement by allowing tourists to step out of their comfort zones. Recently, I was seeing some place in Nandi where people dive into a river and from a very high cliff. So that is some of the kind of adventure tourism that can be cultivated, not only for international tourism, but also for locals. Then we have ecotourism. It has been listed as wildlife, nature, and scenic tourism in our in our 2030 tourism blueprint. And basically it caters for visitors in the natural environment without damaging or disturbing habitats. It is a form of tourism involving visiting fragile, pristine, and relatively undisturbed natural areas, intended as a low impact and often small scale alternative to standard commercial mass tourism. I think Kenya has done well in the ecotourism sector. We have been able to really sell ecotourism internationally, but now we need to sell it to domestic tourists. And then there is what is known as agro-rural tourism. You'll find in some countries in Europe, such as Netherlands, People will go and visit a dairy farm and see how cheese is made, how cheese is processed. The cheese is made that and buy cheese to take away with them. This is just an example of agro-rural tourism. And this is where the visitors go to rural agricultural related farms. And this touristic niche also enhances local culture as an attraction for tourists, because it can focus on traditional crops, which are only grown in that area, or on using traditional methods of farming. Tourists are interested in seeing and participating in agricultural life in the cultural setting. An advantage of this niche is that it promotes rural areas as popular destinations and gives a glimpse into our cultural lives. So it expands the scope of our tourism from just visiting parks and monuments to also visiting our rural homes to experience this agro-rural tourism. And then we also want to see policies addressing technology and innovation. So for Kenya to remain relevant and a globally competitive destination post-COVID, we must be innovative and embrace technology. Technology can help the tourism and food service industries recover faster through reducing costs, enhancing operational efficiency, and improving services and customer experiences. And the final kind of policy we want to see is a policy leveraging on the traditional knowledge economy. So the knowledge economy is a system of consumption and production that is based on intellectual capital. And we now live in an era of knowledge-driven growth and development, where resource-intensive growth is being replaced by economic development based on knowledge, innovation, and creativity. So the Kenyan tourism and food service industries need to leverage on this, on the traditional knowledge or on this knowledge-driven growth by tapping into what, for example, our ancestors used to do and what has been passed down to us in terms of traditional knowledge. And traditional knowledge encompasses a broad knowledge base. It touches on agriculture, science, health and medicine, conservation, music, art, design, literature, language, history, and even geography. So tourists may want to come and learn, for example, how to play the eshiriri, or to play the orutu, or play any other instrument. You take them to that local setting where they learn from the locals who know how to play that instrument. Or a tourist may be interested in using food as medicine or using herbal medicines, and you take them to an area which has developed this use of crops or plants as herbal medicines, and they visit the area, they learn about the plants and how the plants are used as traditional medicine. Traditional knowledge has actually contributed significantly to the many aspects of modern life. For example, modern medicine started from traditional medicine. Our music is actually based on our traditional knowledge of music and musical instruments. So tourism and food industries can borrow aspects of traditional knowledge in their product development to expand tourist experience while also enhancing local economies. So with that, I will leave you with a Luya proverb that says, "A child who travels surpasses his father's wisdom." So let us travel so that we can surpass the wisdom of our fathers and our elders and pass this wisdom down to our future generations. Thank you. Akisa, over to you. You're on mute, Akisa.
You're always doing that on Zoom meetings. That was a very rich presentation. Thank you very much, Didi, for that. I believe there would be a number of questions. But you have pretty much tackled perhaps everything that we wanted to have you respond to in this particular session. You speak on expanding our scope of tourism. You speak on why we then also need to make domestic tourism a core, because if anything, COVID has been an eye-opener, especially in this particular sector, that start home, then bring in the visitors. Kenya is rich with culture, communities, but we still do not seem to be tapping into that. You've mentioned foods, you've mentioned traditional brews, different ways of life in all our over 40 tribes in the country. How can we leverage on this rich culture we have to just ensure that we get first more locals traveling, and not just to Mombasa for the beach and to the Mara, not the cliche kind of travels? How do we tap into this? Do you have any suggestions around that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when our tourism industry is developing the tourism circuits, I think they should try and go outside the normal trails. These are the wildlife areas and the beaches. Or first of all, try to include some of our culture and our heritage in the tourism trails that they already have, or the tourism circuits that they already have. I know that mostly we have the Maasai culture, which is included in all this. But we have not exploited a lot of our other cultures in Kenya. So for example, recently I was just having a visit by some of my friends to our village. And one of the things I thought was that these people are always eating rice and such foods when they're back in Nairobi. Why don't we prepare for them traditional foods? Because they were coming from different parts of Kenya. And actually the experience they had was a very broad experience, just by the fact of that we served them our local Luya foods, and also we served them busa as opposed to buying beer and whiskeys to serve them. So that really expanded their experience. And they were saying, oh, we need to come back in December, for example, and enjoy the local brew and the local foods. Or we didn't know you people cook meat like this. We didn't know you dry it first. Or we didn't know you have this kind of local vegetables here as well. We also have it. So they start seeing an overlap between their culture and our culture. So I think selling culture is a very key part of the tourism sector. There's a time I visited China, I think 5 years ago. It was not tourism, it was actually an environmental learning experience, but they were taking us around touring monuments, and we were not only touring monuments, every day we were going to eat a different kind of Chinese food in a different restaurant. And but the host of the restaurant gave us a history of the food, how it is prepared, why it came about to be prepared in that way. And it was very interesting for us to learn. So I think that those are some of the things that we need to go above and beyond in our tourism sector to expand our experiences. And Kenyans also want to know about each other. Yeah. We want to know about, for example, a tribe in another part of Kenya, what they do, how they dress, how they cooked traditionally, how they farmed, how they lived. Mm-hmm. And it would be important to sell that kind of culture.
Mm-hmm. So where are we falling short? How then do we package this even for our international market? And I'm glad you mentioned food and, giving us an example on hosting your friends. What really is the place of especially indigenous foods in this entire conversation? Because among the things you talked about on niche tourism was culinary tourism. What would be the place of indigenous foods in all this?
My take is that firstly, we need to sell our indigenous foods to our international hotels. If you go to an international hotel in Ethiopia, you will eat their traditional foods. They will always be on the menu, or they'll always be in the buffet. And not only will you eat their traditional foods, they have this a coffee ceremony that they have every evening, and you may choose to participate or not to participate. So our hotels, even though they are catering for the international palate, they should also have our traditional foods on offer. And I think our coastal hotels are doing well in this. If you go there, you'll find the mahamri, the coconut rice, a lot of the traditional coastal foods there. But in Nairobi especially, and even if we're talking about business tourism, we need to have our local foods on the menu. So once the tourist eats that food and becomes interested, they'll want to learn more about the origins, the culture of this food, and then you can sell to them to go maybe to central Kenya or western Kenya or coast to be able to learn or understand the background behind those foods and savor their original and traditional flavors from the origin. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to work with our major hotels and make sure that we have our local foods on the menu always. Mm-hmm.
You also talked about inclusion of innovation in everything we do, and especially around policy. Could you expand on that? How do we merge all this into a technological, techno-savvy way of doing things?
Yeah, technology, we cannot run away from technology. We are seeing now can I call them the traditional, is it a tour agent or a travel agent, are sort of being moved out of the way because we have platforms online where you can book your entire trip from the flight to the accommodation. It shows you the discounts that are available. So we are using the computer, we are using the phone to book our own tours and travels. So our local communities, our local tourism sector should take advantage of this technology, leverage on it, make sure that they're on all those platforms so that they can be found by the visitor who doesn't want to use a travel agent but wants to book their own travel experience. Secondly, one of the things that I see we are not doing much is the virtual tourism. There's a time just during COVID, we actually went on a game drive in South Africa where the rangers were actually taking us on a virtual game drive. So the rangers are there going on a game drive, explaining to us, obviously we are seeing the wildlife and explaining it to us. So we need to sort of be innovative. In a way, right now, you cannot have the visitors physically coming to the park. You can set up a platform where they pay a little money to go on on the virtual tour to see the place, to see the sites. And then I think we also need to use our virtual, especially when it comes to culinary tourism, use sites such as YouTube. You know, we have food bloggers, have them teach people, for example, how to cook our local and traditional foods. We also need to emphasize the healing or medicinal value of some of our foods because some people are interested in the food because of maybe the healing or medicinal value. So we need to have such platforms online. I've never seen a YouTube channel showing me how to make busa. That is something I'd be very interested in knowing how to make myself. I'm actually seeing a comment from somebody called Twepista on the chat that the brews are actually discouraged by the law as they are illegal. So that is one of actually the challenges we face. The only issue with our local brews is that they are not regulated. We need to work with the relevant government authorities to make sure that the way in which these brews are made is well regulated to maintain standards. The reason that they are illegalized is because people are now putting harmful chemicals into those brews, maybe to make them more potent and earn more money out of selling just a little bit of it. But I think this is something we need to embrace. We need to work with the relevant stakeholders, the government agencies, to make sure that our local brews are actually well regulated and they're on offer. So let us embrace our technological platforms that we have available, YouTube and the likes, and let us also be innovative in the way we think. Innovation does not necessarily mean technology. We need to think outside the box when it comes to the tourism and food industry sector. Right now, for example, when you order food, because of the COVID-19, the restaurants were closed, but the only foods we found that you can order mostly are fast foods, chips, sausages. Yeah. Where can I go to order, fish or ugali, such foods, our traditional foods that I may want to eat, but I may not have the time to cook or know how to cook. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let us be innovative in the way we think and the way we do things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How then do we, Didi, go? Of course, when we're talking about the tourism sector and ways of expansion, one of the key reasons is that it's of monetary value at the end of the day for the country, that we increase the monetary gains or financial gains out of this. But then, like you mentioned, how then do we maintain our authenticity, even as we rush, to welcome all these, international tourists, to try and get a lot more Kenyans to travel? How do we maintain our brand authenticity as a country while doing this?
First of all, we need to know what our brand is. What is our brand? Important. What is it that we are selling out there in order to remain authentic? Mm. And then I think we also need to plug into our cultures, to appreciate them, to learn what our culture is, to appreciate it, to understand it and appreciate it. Otherwise, you cannot sell or remain authentic to something you don't know or to something that you are very far removed from. Yeah. So we need to go back and plug into our cultures to understand them. Just like you see, when people think of Kenyan culture, they think of Maasai culture. They don't know that we have over 42 tribes in this country, each with their own different, unique, and very beautiful culture that we can have out there to sell to our locals. If you go to a hotel in Western Kenya, you may find, for example, people are selling traditional artifacts. Like there's a market, but what is in that market? It's a Maasai market. They're selling you Maasai beads and Maasai shukas. Where are the Luya, for example, artifacts that we want to see? So I think we need to plug into our culture, learn it and understand it in order to remain authentic to it. I applaud Brand Kenya, for example, for trying to sell our culture, although mostly they sell our wildlife, and what we see is the Maasai culture. I think we need to like broaden this culture for people to see that what we are selling is actually more than just the Maasai culture. We have other cultures with us that have different unique food, music, traditional clothing, traditional houses, for example. And then we just stick to this, sell it as authentically as it is. Don't try to Westernize it. For example, let the Western visitor or the international visitor come and understand it as it is, as opposed to trying to Westernize it.
Mm-hmm. So then what you're saying, we need perhaps to curate an experience that would include all our different cultures and traditions.
Yes, I'm not saying just one experience, it would be impossible. Mm-hmm. But what we need to do is, like, if people are visiting Mount Kenya, they want to go and hike in Mount Kenya, the experience they should get there is for, say, the Kikuyu tribe or Meru tribe, Embu tribe, the tribes that live around, that are originally from the Mount Kenya area. Yeah, let the food on offer be from those people. Let the elders, for example, from those tribes come and give a talk, a historical talk of the mountain, you know, what the mountain means to the local people. How did they used to climb the mountain traditionally, you know, without all this mountain climbing equipment? You know, what does it mean? Why did they used to worship while facing the mountain? Such history would add value to the experience of the mountain climber. They'd climb the mountain knowing it's actually a sacred site. It's a sacred place they are climbing, as opposed to just conquering a mountain for their own strength or their own, you know. They'll feel that I'm actually doing a sacred activity while climbing this mountain. So that is what I'm saying. When you go to a specific tourism circuit or tourism site, let us sell the culture of that area, so that also the locals can participate. The locals can also sell their history. The locals can sell their music. You know, they can sell whatever it is they have on offer as a part of their culture.
What would be the lessons we've picked from the disruptions, the major disruptions from COVID-19, that perhaps we need to carry on even as we talk about a post-COVID for the country, and especially in the tourism and food service industry?
One of the key lessons is that we need to get Kenyans out and traveling. This means that we need to make the tourism, let me not say cheap, but affordable for the ordinary Kenyan. We need to make tourism destinations reachable and accessible to the ordinary Kenyan who may want to travel and experience and you know, get that tourism experience. One thing my siblings and I did last year was to travel around in Western Kenya just to see the local sites, you know, some waterfall here, you know, and a rock outcrop there. This is because we discovered that when we go home to Western Kenya, and you say, oh, I'm only, as we go to Ushago, it's boring. But why should Ushago be boring? Why should your home be boring? There are many things around our homes which we have not yet discovered, which we need to go out there and see. For example, you know, like we have the Kakamega Crying Stone. We need to go out there and see it. There are some, we have certain nice waterfalls and rapids around our area. We go out there and see. And the locals also benefit, you know. They see that we have actually a sacred site here, or a site of interest here. So I think what we need to do is to get Kenyans out and traveling. Mm-hmm. And one thing I saw is that staying home is very difficult. You feel sort of imprisoned. You want to get out. And Nairobi Park was actually a very good place to be available for us to go out and just have a game live and let off the steam. So that is another thing we have learned, have these open spaces, these natural areas like Nairobi National Park. This is a heritage we should fight for to have, because in this city, we go through a lot of pressures, psychological, physical, economic, mental. That park really helps us to distress. Mm-hmm. So Nairobi Park is very helpful. Another thing we've learned is we need to be very adaptable. We need to really quickly adapt to change. So especially the tourism sector, the food industry, hotels really suffered a big blow. Bars and clubs are now really suffering a big blow because people can no longer go there. So what are the innovative ways of having people to get these experiences? For example, you don't have to go to the bar, still social distance outside these places. Can you bring a bar to the outside, for example, to an outside space, you know, that there is social distancing, people are not coming together. Can you bring some of these experiences to the outside? So the food industry tried by having home deliveries of food, you know, you could order food online and it comes in. That was very innovative. The tour companies I saw actually now really selling Kenya. And you see, that is what they needed to have done before. They're really selling Kenya. And when I went to Nairobi Park, there was actually a really long queue of tour vans. And it had all these local tourists, domestic tourists from Nairobi and even outside Nairobi, wanting to go in and visit the park. So it means that actually they had not been marketing this park to Kenyans. But now that the park has been marketed to Kenyans, then we are seeing many Kenyans going out. So let our tourism industry see the Kenyans as their first customer, get affordable packages for Kenyans to be able to travel and have all these experiences.
Yes, just finish up, yes.
Yeah, so there was an experience I was seeing in some country where they have a road, train, and ship experience. So whereby, for example, if it's in Kenya, you go by the SGR, so they pay for you, go by the SGR to Mombasa, you spend a night in Mombasa, you go by road to somewhere else, and then you go by ship and come back to Mombasa and take the train back. So it's just a tourism experiencing 3 different methods of transportation. And then you say, oh, it was fun, you know. So just to think outside the box and think about what you can sell. To many Kenyans, just going on that train is a very big deal. Going on a ship is a very big deal, a very big experience, a very unique experience. And that is what we need to leverage on such things.
One of the things, and I'd also pick up from what James Chikwazi says in the chat, that can you say something about your book, that he thinks such books can kickstart interest in new destinations. Of course, I believe he's talking about Wamukoya Netia. We spoke about that book before we came on. When we're talking about opening up to both domestic and international tourists to our different ways of cultures, would you say using writing such as yours would help in just opening up that space and piquing interests of these people to, you know, try and come in?
Yeah, I think writing is one way to sell our culture and our language also. You'll realize our language is getting lost. Also because of intermarriages. If you find somebody from one tribe getting married to somebody from a different tribe, they'll tend to speak the common languages of English and Swahili. And those are the languages the children will learn. And so they'll sort of lose their traditional, their tribes, you know, their languages. Mm-hmm. So books are another way of selling our languages. And in this book I wrote, Wamukoya Netia, it was actually a soul-searching experience. I wanted to know my roots, who I was, where I came from. You know, we're always told that, you know, we come from the greatest kings in Eastern Africa. So I wanted to get a history of this, you know, who are these people? And I actually visited my older uncles, some of the elders in our community back home. I visited the Navongo Museum. I actually learned a lot from that museum. It's located in Matungu in Kakamega County. And what I learned was actually beyond what I expected to learn. In fact, I didn't put everything in that book because what I learned was so much. So I'm writing another book that will include, I'm writing another book that will include some of the other aspects of our culture that I learned. And one of the things I learned about our culture is that it was mostly eroded because we were meant to understand, let me just say this, the way the British colonizers tried to get us more easily, to rule us more easily, is by selling religion. And religion was opposed to our traditional cultural practices because most of them were seen as ungodly. However, if we understand the background behind why our ancestors did what they were doing, there was a logic to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a logic to it. And so most of the things we have lost now to the modern lifestyle, the modern religion that sort of looked down on our traditional way of life. But these things should not be thrown, they need to be down to our future generations. I hope you all know we still have a Nabongo, that is a king in the Wanga kingdom. He may not be as well known, for example, as Nabongo Mumia, who was the one, mostly the last great king, because that is the one who was found by the British. So in my book, I actually talk about this Nabongo called Wamukoya Netia. He is actually the grandfather of Nabongo Mumia. So just how he went through to become a king in the throne. There was actually this, the history is always, there's even on the internet, online, about the fight between Wamukoya Netia and his elder brother Kweyu in order to become king. So Wamukoya Netia was the younger brother, and it was the elder brother who was supposed to become king. However, their father gave Wamukoya Netia the kingship because of what he was told by the ancestors or through prayer and so on. He felt that Wamukoya Netia should be the one who is the king. So if you go to the Wanga kingdom, even today, you'll find that it is split. We have a Wanga Mukulu in East Wanga, and then you have now the original Wanga, which was ruled by Wamukoya Netia and the rest who succeeded him. So this book just follows that story. It follows how they went about preparing themselves to become the kings, but it also goes into a lot of the history, a lot of the traditions, the backgrounds, the marriage traditions, for example. What is it that is the mark of authority for the Nabongo? In this case, it's not a crown like the British.
Yeah.
So you get to understand some of those things, and it's important. And I use a lot of Luya words in the book. You may find it hard to understand, but it's because I wanted the book to be authentic, and some of these words cannot be translated to English. It's difficult to translate them to English. You lose the meaning of the word. However, there's a glossary in the book which will give you the meanings of those words, and then you'll get to understand, you'll get to learn the Luya language or the Wanga dialect.
How available was information when you were going back to just do research to, piece things together? How available was this information? And depending on what your answer will be, how then do we make sure that there's a lot of information on our culture? How do we store it?
I think the Nabongo Museum was very helpful. And I think we have most of our tribes, if you go, you'll find a cultural museum there. So I think it's important to have these museums to store our heritage. So the Nabongo Museum, and it had a guy there, a historian, who really gave us the story behind, the history behind this culture, behind our culture. And you see, it's not just the history, the cultural history, but the local life, the day-to-day life, for example. Like this person, they would wake up in the morning, they'd go farming. And that's what makes the experience in the book more authentic, because I got to understand the day-to-day life. For example, when I had started drafting the book, I was writing about years, that he was 18 years old. And then I visited the Nabongo Cultural Museum, and he explained to me, they used to, the biggest reckoning of time was the harvest, from the first harvest of millet to the next. So to make the book authentic, I had to move away from years and go to harvests, So it gives you authentic day-to-day life, how they used to drink busa, how the kings used to live, and so on. About the wives of the king, they were polygamous, the first wife and the kind of authority and respect she was given. So I also talked to the elders in our clan, my uncles, and one of the interesting things I found with my uncle is that he said he cannot give the history of the clan to Abuibo. So in Luya culture, we have what are known as the Inono. This is the name given to a certain clan, girls of a certain clan, just to identify them with that clan. So for our clan, it is Abuibo. So he told me that he cannot give the history of the clan to Abuibo. That is a woman in the clan, because the woman will get married and go and tell the secrets of the clan to the man. Because you obviously... And then he told me that one never marries a relative, you only marry an enemy. So you'll go to the enemy of the clan and tell them the secrets of the clan. But I told him, I'm not only telling the enemy, I'm telling the entire world.
You tell the world.
My brother, I had to drag my brother through all these research sessions. But it's like he's the one asking the questions and I'm just sitting there docile, you know, taping or taking notes, because they could not tell me the history. They could only tell my brother. Yeah. So that's another way that I think we get to learn these things. I think because we are girls, we don't learn a lot of our culture. I got to learn that actually during circumcision, our men are told so much about their culture, about the history of the clan or the tribe, which we as women don't go through because we don't go through that rite of passage. So we don't get to understand that history and that culture. So for the current book I'm writing, I actually talked to a couple of pastors. These are independent churches. And because I wanted to get to understand about, I just asked them, why do you think our culture is so bad? Why are you always praying against it? What are these practices that you want to break? And so they told me a lot about our culture, just based from the religious perspective, that this is bad, and this is why it's bad. You know, this is why this tradition is bad. And that way I got to understand the tradition and how it was practiced. Yeah, so I talked to all these kinds of people to get the information.
Right.
It was not so hard, but it took a bit of, you know, spending time with different people in our community to get to know this.
Well, Topista says, rich cultural history there. We should have more of such for the younger generation. Didi, you should serialize the stories for a radio audience on a Luya station. And I'd add to say, not just a Luya station. I think this is something that a lot of us should read. And at this point, we take one or two questions. We are almost heading to the tail end of the conversation. If there's any question from the audience for Didi, while we wait for that, Didi, you owe us a book, so we wait for this part two. Yes. I'm sure James is very excited and waiting for that. Please let us know once it's out. I'd really, really love to read that. Any questions from our audience? You could raise your hand or chat. Okay, Topista says that she's ready to link Didi with Radio Ingo for this. Let me have your number. I think this is, of course, a conversation, Didi, you'll pick with Topista later after this session. Would love to see more of what you're talking about. All right, looks like we don't have much questions, so.
I'd like just to get Balong of Kabarak University to say something, because I know he's in the technology innovation world, but you've just listened to what Didi has said. I mean, from policy innovation, and you can see she's saying we can also take individual initiative to get whatever we talk about activating tourism. I mean, she did a book, and this book already is creating a lot of excitement about the Western culture, Western Kenya culture. So Kabarak University, Balongo.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I may not be able to say much because I found she already started, but what I say is that she's doing a good job, especially now, like building a brand. You know, she said something about a brand. Without a brand, you can't move anywhere, and she's doing a good job. You first start by building a brand. So we need to build a brand whereby we need to accept our traditional foods. Yeah. And especially the busa, as you say. If you go to foreign countries, they'll give you their own brew, yeah? So let us build that brand first. Let us have our desired destination. Where do we want our food tourism to be? So once we build the brand and have a desired destination, then that is when now we can have collaborations from different players, talk of the government, to have policies that will ease and allow a production of local brews. You know, actually, as she had talked, people put in some chemicals. This is done because they have a short time to prepare. I understand something like Changa needs a minimum of 14 days. But you can imagine 14 days and you have the village chief there. I believe by the third day, you'll find yourself in trouble. So people have become innovative, whereby now they use chemicals to shorten from 14 days, I think, to 2 hours. So we should have a collaboration between stakeholders, the government to ease the policy, go to our neighboring countries in East Africa, where it has been allowed. You'll never hear of deaths about warrage in Uganda. Go to Tanzania, you'll never hear deaths about Konyagi and so on. Then also now to enhance these traditional whatever, let us also have a presence online. Now with COVID, it has shown us that very many things need to go on the online platform. Yeah, so let us also have some presence online. Let us have virtual food festivals just like this one. It's very interesting. Then let us have products that will also add quality. Yeah, there's a part that Didi mentioned on traditional ways of climbing the mountain. Can we have those traditional methods? Maybe they're being discarded because maybe somebody had to use more energy and so on. Can we go back and see what we can add more so that they become more attractive as compared to the Westernized one? Then also, another thing interesting that Didi has mentioned, and I think if we focus on that, when we're having this food festival, we went to China, you were tasting different meals every day, and we used to explain to you about the food. So can you also be having storytelling? Yeah, storytelling about the food, connecting the food and the culture. I think this again will attract, an innovative way of attracting people towards this, so that as they are consuming that ugali from Muogo, they are being told, you know, tunasiaga na mawe, yeah, storytelling, connecting the culture and the food. I think that will also increase or attract people towards that, and then we'll forget about the KFC. So we'll be talking about Amaika and so on, going to our traditional foods. Yeah, that is all. Thank you very much, James. Yeah, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Wilson Balongo, as James has said. I'm the coordinator for innovation and business incubation at Kabarak University. Yes, and also on the panel, we're with Shadrach Koech, who is also a lecturer, School of Business, Innovation. Shadrach is also a product of James. He's a former student of Enactors, 2013. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Wilson. That was rich. Didi, perhaps would you have any response to a number of things he's mentioned as we try and wind up?
No, I don't have any responses. Just a last word, I think, just to emphasize that if we are authentic and sell our culture, I think we will get a lot of domestic tourism. Let us use our media and social media. We usually see some of these BBC shows like Tribe, where somebody goes to live in a remote tribe somewhere. Why can't we have such of our own, somebody from Nairobi going to experience life in Samburu or in, you know, Taita or wherever? Just experience the cultural life and have it as a TV series, and I'm sure we'll enjoy, and we will, once we see that, we'll also want to go to that place and experience it for ourselves. So let us embrace our culture, let us embrace make a brand out of our culture, and I think we will succeed in the tourism and food industry in Kenya.
Great, thank you very much. And we'll wind up with a comment there from Brabra Shikuku, who says, Wamukoya Netia is an interesting book. It would be great to have such books for younger audiences also. This would really help to create a culture awareness. Thank you, Barbara, for that. And thank you to all participants in this particular session. I think we'd wind up at this point. It's 12:47 p.m. I'm Akisa Andera, TV journalist at KTN News, and it was glad to join all of you here. I know this is an engagement we'll continue to have, James. It's not a conversation that should, let this not be a talk show. Let us actualize some of the ideas that have come out of this particular Zoom meeting, and expansively on the IREN Growthpad Food Festival 2020. We'll be glad to support where we can and see where we take it. I'd like to hand it over to you now, James.
Yeah, thank you, Akisa. Thank you, Didi. Well, not much to add apart from emphasizing your point. We are here to make it practical, concrete. It's not a talk shop. So let's watch this space. Thank you.